Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Tuesday. Let's talk about tribalism versus factionalism. I encountered a link to an article on Gab this past Sunday, and it has given me pause. I will include a link to this article in the description box below so you can investigate it for yourself. And my personal thanks to the individual on Gab who posted the link to this article in the first place. It has yielded a lot of thoughts. The article itself is found on discoursemagazine.com, and the article is titled, "The Problem Today is Not Tribalism, but Its Absence," and it was written by a lady called Jennifer Brick. I'm going to mess up this last name, so please forgive me. Murtazashvili, published May 20th, 2020. So it's an older article, but it was resonating with me. Now, tribalism is a word I have never particularly cared for. It's always sounded collectivistic to my ears, and I'm about as rabid an anti-collectivist as you are likely to encounter. I believe in people being able to make voluntary decisions about whom they do and do not associate with. I'm anti-force and anti-coercion, and I am anti-emotional blackmail, most especially where human relationships are concerned. So that's my starting point when it comes to this article. And when the author suggested a different perspective on tribalism as a concept and its definition as a word, I admit that my mind was not particularly open, but I read it anyway. And to, this last name, Murtazashvili's credit, she acknowledges the baggage surrounding this particular word. And I quote, "The dirtiest word in U.S. politics these days is tribalism. For pundits and policymakers, tribalism is blind group loyalty that is tearing our country apart. Mindless tribal affiliations, they say, drive our polarizations and prevent us from finding common ground. The greatest danger of tribalism, we are told, is that it morphs political leanings into social identities, creating political morass, gridlock, and decay." End quote. They find this a fair assessment of how the word is viewed. It's certainly consistent with how it's commonly used and perceived within political commentary, at least among the people who I personally follow. And it's difficult to dispute. There's no shortage of examples of people who do have that blind loyalty to their political tribes. It's their team, right or wrong. And that's if you can even get some people to acknowledge that there is any such thing as right or wrong. But because this was acknowledged, it did intrigue me to hear the author's argument. And she continues, quote, "But these pundits and policymakers have the story backwards. Indeed, we have enormous political challenges because we no longer value or know how to live like tribes, to make rules together, to develop consensus, to work out difficult problems without calling for outside help. In fact, tribes, real tribes, provide a great deal of meaning, community, and connection. Let me take this a step further. If American society were to adopt some tribal characteristics, we would all be a lot better off." End quote. This paragraph is the one that really hit me, and it's because it ties into what I've been talking about recently about the need to create more pagan communities, and honestly for society in general to be a society rather than to be in a civil war of words that has every potential to become physically violent. As much as we need to be individuals and need to be free, we are not free-floating atoms. Humans are social creatures. We have complex emotional needs that are not going to be met outside of social structures and relationships. So this has me asking the question, if the bad experience I had with the social structure that I was raised in, which was the Jehovah's Witness organization that my parents and most of my mother's relatives are all still a part of, if this was the thing that caused me to be unduly dismissive of the value of being part of a group and having kind of a secondary identity from that. Yes, it's vital to be able to cope and function on your own if needs be, but there is also meaning and value to be found in human relationships and larger social structures, and I'm wondering if perhaps I've taken too hyper an individualistic view on this in the past. So that's something that I'm having an internal struggle with. So at this point, 2 paragraphs into the article, my mind is officially open and I am willing to question my premises. And I would like to give the writer props for that. It's no mean feat to persuade me that an opinion that I have given considerable thought to and can provide a very rational defense for has missed the mark in some way or is failing to see the larger picture. So credit where credit is due. Well done. Now next, the article contrasts a historical meaning of the word tribalism versus the contemporary view of tribalism in a political context. The historical example is that of Ibn Khaldun, who was an Arab historian born in 1332, which takes us back quite a way. He wrote a treatise called, and this is another word I'm going to botch, so please bear with me, Muqaddimah. And in this document, it has the concept of asabiya, and that's what's discussed. The article describes asabiya as the glue that holds a society together. It's defined as a group feeling. In other words, knowing oneself to be part of a people with a shared history, shared concerns, and a shared future. It was through this feeling that a society was formed and also sustained. Without it, Mircea Zashvili writes, quote, leaders who could not cultivate this group feeling among members struggled to find legitimacy and ultimately collapsed, end quote. Isn't that an interesting statement, especially when we compare it to our current political landscape? Where do we find group feeling? And I want to be specific and say that I mean a healthy group feeling. Not this business where people are united by and defined by the never-ending list of things they hate and disapprove of and oppose and want to cancel people for. But what about, a group feeling that is defined by what people are for, who they love, the history they share, and what they hope to build together in the future? I can't find it anywhere in these social political groups. That much is certain. And if you can think of an example, please let me know, because I'd like to take that into consideration. So, the present day example of how tribalism is viewed is what the author describes as an ephemeral factionalism manifested in 280 character tweets or by an endless cycle of cable news pundits. The problem is compounded by the abuse of the term tribes. Today, tribalism has become a basket category for our nasty state of affairs. That is, the things we believe cause our increased polarization. In her popular recent book, Political Tribes, Amy Qual decries political tribalism as a source of political decay, but never defines what tribes are, end quote. Now, in order to argue against something, it is absolutely necessary to be able to accurately define it. Tossing out words or concepts because they sound like the boogeyman not only runs the risk of misrepresenting something, either intentionally or through a genuine lack of understanding. We have to know what these things mean, and if we don't, it weakens the entire argument. So the question becomes, does the concept of tribalism as presented by the author of this article, I'm not trying her name again, I've made you suffer enough, but does her definition, then what she's presenting, differ in any meaningful way from the definition of the word factionalism? So I looked it up at dictionary.com, and it says this: factionalism is a condition in which a group, organization, government, etc. is split into two or more smaller groups with differing and often opposing opinions or interests. So, now we have a view of tribalism in which we have the idea of a cohesive whole working together for common benefit versus fractures of a whole that are fighting it out either metaphorically or literally. So based on this, I think it is fair to say that there is a differentiation to be made between tribalism and factionalism. Factionalism does seem to be what we are observing in politics, society, religion, sports, the arts. I'm finding it very difficult to point to an area of life that has not been affected by factionalism. Now, the author of the article goes on to make the case that the root for many of our problems comes from the lack of tribalism, and that there is a yearning to have some kind of sense of belonging within a group that means something. And she highlights the benefits of a tribal society, which arguably go beyond having a shared identity as in the sense of being of the same community. She mentioned production of goods, dispute resolution, self-defense and protection, even infrastructure. And she notes that while tribal societies certainly are not without conflict, but she points to James Ferran and David Lation, who are both political scientists, and they stated that different groups coincide and coexist all the time around the world. But conflict between tribes is more the exception than the norm. And that is a claim that I will be doing further research on to see whether or not it can be verified. I suspect, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that if it can be established that tribe-on-tribe conflict is less frequent than it is in other kinds of societies, we would probably also find, and this is my theory, that the tribes in question occupy their own defined territories. They're governed in their own ways without influence or interference from neighboring groups. And I'll go a step further and I will put forth the supposition that such societies are probably also not experiencing serious controversies within themselves. Sometimes, if a society is having difficulties or is even on the verge of collapse, the leaders of that society will seek out an external enemy to unite the people and refocus their attention on an external threat, whether or not that threat is real or imagined. And this is all in an effort to not be removed from power. But again, this is something I have to do further research on. So the article finishes this way, quote, "In the U.S., it is not tribalism driving our profane politics, but its absence. Without a strong sense of asabiya, of group feeling that we are all in this together, we are going nowhere fast. Calden's theory of tribal politics, while written centuries ago, is a powerful parable. It shows how the breakdown of meaningful social relationships leads to political decay. What society has lost is asabiya, the glue that holds us together. Tribes can provide us this glue, a sense of community and belonging. Certainly, tribes can exclude, but this is not their raison d'etre, which is to provide, to give meaning, and to protect." End quote. So I've been looking at this article through two lenses, from a more secular point of view just as an American citizen, and then through a religious point of view as a pagan. And I find myself taking her line of reasoning pretty seriously. When I was growing up, even though I was raised in a religious community that considers itself above national allegiances, I nevertheless observed that my classmates and my teachers in school, they all had a sense of what it was to be an American, what that meant. And I recall that, just little things, little behaviors, things that people would say, phrases they would use, that did indicate that they considered themselves as part of a greater whole. They didn't view their fellow citizens as anything other than their countrymen. Regardless of whether they agreed or disagreed with them politically. I wonder how many school children in the present time would form that kind of impression now. I would say very, very few. And I would challenge the person who would come up and say that, out of honesty, that they don't believe the United States is falling apart and that they don't think that there's an issue with a lack of shared values and identity as Americans, and that they just don't see this as a root cause and everything is, we've had bad patches, this is another, we'll get through it, and blah, blah, blah. But the question I would ask is this: how many people would describe themselves as an American? First and foremost, I'm an American. And how many people would define themselves as some other kind of category? Something defined by the political identitarians. How many people lead with, my name is, and I'm this gender or this sexuality, or I'm this political tribe or whatever else? We do seem to have factions aplenty, but we have very, very little community, and we seem to be defined more and more on things that make us divided from our neighbors than anything that we have in common with them. So I do think, I do think this article has merit where that's concerned. So within paganism, we know we have all kinds of branches, and as well as countless personal paths that have been pursued by individuals. And while I think many of us understand that non-pagans who disapprove of paganism, they disapprove of us all, not just certain traditions. But this understanding, it hasn't fostered a strong sense of community, not broadly, not in a way that's tangible. Or maybe perhaps I should say that it hasn't been enough to encourage us to form groups and communities for shared worship and encouragement, at least not as a general rule. Although I do hope that is changing, and I see some signs that it is changing, or people are trying to form these groups to where people can come together and, celebrate the good things about our traditions, and, in a friendly atmosphere with people who have similar beliefs. And if we are to become more tribal in this sense, it is going to require that we stop idealizing the kind of hyper-individualism that seems to be more about avoiding having anything in common with any other human being than it does about gleaning spiritual benefits from pagan principles. And I think there's a lot to meditate on that particular score. So categorically, I can agree with the author of this article that factionalism is a destabilizing force, and it is ripping society apart at the seams. I think that much is beyond dispute. We can see it with our own eyes on a daily basis. But the question is tribalism the solution? Now, with the caveat, I am not a believer in any form of utopia, not of any description. And I admit that no society is going to be perfect. Problems are inevitable. All that being said, I find myself willing to explore the idea that we do need to have a form of tribalism, both to survive as a society and to survive as a religious movement. I don't think this should be pursued blindly, and we need to have conversations about what would this look like in practice. What checks and balances would there be involved? Upon what principles and common values would this really be based? However, even though we have all those questions and we can't answer them right this second, what we do know beyond any doubt is that factionalism doesn't work. It is self-destructive, and it hurts everything it touches. I think we can figure out a way to form communities while still preserving individual freedoms and have voluntary association based on mutual respect and trust. And honestly, there's no time like the present to start working on figuring these things out and putting our theories into practice. But it's not a subject that's can be covered just in one video. I hope this is the beginning of a larger discussion. And in that vein, I hope you'll let me know what you think. Do you agree or disagree with the substance of the article? Did it change your mind, or did it confirm your beliefs? I'm interested in hearing people's impressions about this and having conversations, because we do need to think about how to build a future, whether we're talking about in the secular or the religious sense. And again, the link to the article is going to be in the description box, so you can find it there. Check it out for yourself. Let me know what your impressions of it are. I do think it's important we talk about these things, and I hope more people in time will become willing to have conversations of this kind, because this is how we lay that foundation for what comes after us. So, looking forward to your thoughts. Leave them here in the comment section below on the channel, or come see me on Discord at Blackbird's Brew. There's also a link to join that in the description box below. And in the meantime, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.